Have you ever wondered how a soldier, practically doomed and blind in one eye, managed to do the impossible and completely change the course of an entire battle? An eerie silence dominates the field, the kind of silence that only exists when death is waiting for someone. And there, crawling among broken bricks and twisted beams, is an American soldier completely exposed, a man who should already be dead. He holds his rifle with a trembling hand, his breath short, a trickle of blood running down. His mouth, and the most shocking detail, his right eye is completely white, opaque, a useless eye in the middle of hell, something any commander would say makes him incapable of fighting. On the other side, somewhere invisible among the shadows of the ruins, lies the man who never missed, the best German sniper in the region, a predator who eliminated targets from almost a kilometer away and who had the macabre habit of letting each enemy die looking at his scope. For him, it was just another execution, another repetitive movement in his routine of deadly perfection. The German adjusts his breathing, controls his pulse, rests his finger on the trigger. He knows the American is weak, disoriented, without any chance of reaction. And, as he aims, a cold smile forms, one of those that warms nothing, only chills. The shot rings out. The bang cuts through the snow like a dry thunderclap. The camera freezes at the exact moment the bullet leaves the German's gun. You feel you are about to witness the inevitable death of a man who should never have been there. Everything points to it. Everything screams it. But before the bullet reaches its target, a phrase bursts into the narrative. They were wrong. And that's when you realize that this story isn't about defeat. It's about something no one expected. It's about an ordinary man who carried a secret that would change everything. An instinct that no amount of military training taught. A skill born from pain, poverty, and a lifetime of being underestimated. What enabled that soldier, blind in one eye, to achieve the impossible? What happened seconds before the impact? How did someone with half the vision manage to beat Germany's best marksman? The answer lies in his past, and it's so absurd that it makes any military manual seem like child's play. Did you notice how a practically condemned soldier became the center of the most impossible duel of the war? If this story has already captivated you this far, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what city and country you're watching from. This really helps to bring rare and powerful stories like this one to the screen. The cold was so intense, it felt like it gnawed at his bones, but nothing hurt more than the memory of what that soldier had been before the war. With each step among the icy ruins, he felt not only the weight of the rifle in his hands, but the weight of his entire life. A life no one there knew. To the other soldiers, he was just the guy with the white eyes, a quiet, strange fellow who rarely smiled and had an odd way of turning his head when someone spoke to him. To them, he was somewhat broken. To him, that was simply the price of survival. His name was Elias Turner, a man who never dreamed of being a soldier. He only wanted to preserve the farm where he grew up, the few lands that remained to him after a storm killed his father and destroyed half the crops. Elias didn't know what rest was. Since he was a boy, he woke before sunrise, ate whatever he could find, and spent the rest of the day carrying heavy loads, pulling up roots, chopping wood, repairing tools. Life in the countryside left no room for laziness. He always told himself, if I stop, I lose, and if I lose, I disappear. But war came like a wind that sweeps everything away, and in that wind, Elijah was pushed straight to the front lines. The first thing they took from him was the silence of the farm. The second was peace. The third was a sense of security. But what the war couldn't take away, because it had already been taken from him since childhood, was the sight in his right eye. What many people saw as a flaw, for Elias was simply a part of him. He wasn't ashamed. He wasn't afraid. He only had one conviction. I've already survived the worst, I'll figure out the rest. And that's what began to shape the legend he didn't know he was building. On the front lines, everything was noise. Explosions that shook the chest. Shouts that tore through the night. The constant clatter of boots marching, running, fleeing. The whole world seemed made of violent, unpredictable sounds. But for Elias, this chaos had order. He heard each thing separately. The difference between the wind hitting a sheet of metal and the distant click of a gun being unlocked. The vibration a bullet made as it ricocheted off concrete. the irregular echo of footsteps hidden in the dark. It was as if the world were a large, hollow box, and he, since childhood, had learned to hear everything through the wood. The other soldiers found it strange how Elijah would tilt his head in a crooked way, tilt his chin almost to his shoulder, and remain motionless, breathing slowly. Some mocked him. Others merely exchanged suspicious glances. But deep down they all knew that when Elijah stopped like that, it meant something was about to happen, something he sensed before everyone else, and they had learned to trust him, even if they didn't understand how. The war slowly consumed his emotions. At first he trembled with fear, then with cold, then with anger, but with time he stopped trembling. Fear turned into attention. Anger became focus. Pain became a tool. Elias felt everything deeply, but he learned to transform each sensation into movement. It was as if he were always balanced between instinct and reasoning, driven by something that came even before thought. One night, as the snow fell as silently as morning, Elias heard the sound that would change everything. It was subtle, almost non-existent. A bolt being pulled, but not like the American soldiers did, but with that meticulous, calculated drag typical of German snipers. He saw nothing, no glint of scopes, no depth of field, but he knew. It was like hearing a predator breathing behind him, and at that moment, something inside him ignited. It wasn't courage, it wasn't adrenaline. It was an old survival reflex, the same one he had on stormy days on the farm, when the wood would start to crack to warn him that the barn was about to collapse. He bent down slowly, pressed his ear to the broken wall panel, and let the sound travel straight through the bones of his face. There, in that eternal second, Elijah understood where the enemy was. Height, distance, angle, as if the world had whispered the answer. From that day on, the American soldiers began to realize that Elias was not just an ordinary sniper. He didn't need to see to know. He didn't need to aim like the others. He worked with a different logic, almost primitive, almost supernatural, and little by little, without realizing it, he built a silent reputation, the soldier who could hear better than any enemy could see. But behind all that, there was much more than technique. There was the constant fear of dying without leaving anything behind, the pain of the past, which tightened in the chest when the icy wind touched the blind side of the face, the loneliness of carrying a gift that no one understood, and, above all, the strange feeling that the entire war was pushing him toward a single moment, a single duel, an inevitable encounter with the man who never made mistakes. Elias felt it deep in his soul, like someone who senses a storm long before the sky darkens. Elias Turner never imagined that one day his name would be whispered in the midst of war, as if it were that of a ghost. For him, everything was always about survival. There was no glory in the cold mornings on the farm, nor heroism in the smell of wet earth after the rain. Elias's life began far from any uniform, far from any battle. He was born in the harsh silence of the countryside, where every small mistake exacted too high a price. He grew up in a simple wooden house, built by his own father, a hard man of few words and many responsibilities. His mother died young, which turned the whole house into a territory of silence. Elias learned to speak with the wind, with the sound of the rain hitting the roof, with the cracking of the trees during storms. He learned to exist where almost no one else existed. Loneliness shaped every fiber of his being even before he understood what the word loneliness meant. The eye injury happened when he was only 12 years old. It was late afternoon, and he was chopping wood to light the stove. The blade stuck in the log snapped back with unexpected force, launching a splinter directly into his face. The pain was immediate, burning like a branding iron. For days, he lay in bed, his face covered with a damp cloth, listening to his father repeat, "These things happen, we move on." When he finally opened his eyes, one could see the world. The other was just a white mist. But Elias didn't cry. Life in the countryside didn't allow for lamentations. It only allowed for adaptation, and that's what he did. Over time, his entire body learned to compensate for the absence of his eye. He would tilt his head slightly more, place his ear closer to the wood, feel vibrations where others only perceive silence. He became an expert at noticing details that people with perfect vision would never perceive. His father said that Elias was a boy who listened to the world before he saw it. That phrase never left him. Gradually, the farm became his unwitting training ground. When the wind swept through the cornfield, Elias knew whether it was going to rain heavily or just a passing breeze. When the oldest cow let out a deeper moo, he knew she was about to give birth. When a board creaked under his feet, he knew exactly where the weak point in the barn was. It was as if his senses had learned to survive for him. But life remained hard, perhaps too hard for someone so young. His father died of pneumonia when Elias was 17, and there, on that day as silent as any other, the boy became a man. He had to take on everything: the land, the debts, the animals. He worked until his bones ached. He slept few hours. He woke before sunrise. And he always carried that strange feeling that the whole world depended on his ability to endure. When war came, it offered no choice. The country called, and Elias answered, not because he wanted to fight, but because he needed to. And paradoxically, it was precisely in the war that all those years of hardship found meaning. In the training camp, no one understood how Elias managed to hit targets in the dark, how he sensed someone's presence meters away, how he always avoided ambushes. He couldn't explain it. He didn't even know how to explain it. It was instinct, something that was born when he lost his eye, something that grew with him, something that accompanied him like an extension of his own body. While the other soldiers were frustrated by mistakes, Elias breathed. He adjusted. He observed. Or rather, he listened. For him, gunshots, footsteps, crackling sounds, and vibrations weren't noise. They were clues. And each clue brought him closer to living another day. It didn't take long for his comrades in arms to begin seeing in Elias something he didn't see in himself. A rare kind of survivor. Someone the war couldn't break because life had already tested him too much. They trusted him. Sometimes they even feared his calmness. Elias moved as if he were always one step ahead, as if the world spoke to him in a unique way. But despite all this, Elias carried a silent pain, the feeling that he belonged to neither world. On the farm, he was the broken boy. In the war, he was the unusual soldier. He never knew how to be ordinary, never knew how to be just another one. And it was precisely this mixture, hard life, loss, silence, adaptation, and instinct, that would transform him into the protagonist of the war's most improbable story. The one where a one-eyed man would face off against Germany's best sniper, and he would come out alive. The trick that would transform Elias Turner into a legend began almost accidentally, in a moment so simple that no one could ever imagine it would change the course of a war. It was a silent dawn when the cold seemed to have teeth, and the wind passed through the cracks in the ruins like an ancient warning. Most of the soldiers were asleep, some shivering, others murmuring in their dreams. Elias, however, was awake. He always was. He hadn't slept well since he was a boy. Silence bothered him less than sound, and that night he heard something strange, a dry, low, almost imperceptible crack coming from somewhere in the ruined mansion that served as a makeshift shelter. An ordinary soldier would have ignored it, thinking it was just old wood giving way to the cold. Elias, however, did not. He stood up slowly, put his ear close to the wall, and closed his only working eye. And then he realized that sound wasn't coming from the wood. It was coming from through of wood. This triggered an old memory, one of those memories that doesn't ask permission to return. He remembered the farm. He remembered the barn before it collapsed. He remembered the wooden planks trembling before the storm ripped off the roof. He remembered how he used to press his ear to the ground to hear where the cows were walking even before he saw them appear around the bend in the trail. He had always heard the world through surfaces, the earth, the wood, the hay, the well water. It was as if the vibrations responded to him before any clear sound existed. It was there, in that freezing early morning, that it dawned on them. He didn't need to see the enemy to find him. He just needed to hear it the right way, and the right path was the surface. From that night on, Elias began to test his instincts. He pressed his ear against the ground, destroyed doors, beams, burnt walls. He listened to everything, the wind passing through holes, the careful footsteps of someone trying to be stealthy, the slight friction of a rifle bolt being cocked on the other side of the ruins. Each sound was like an invisible map, a map that only he could read. That was the trick, using wood, concrete, iron, any surface, as a conductor of the enemy's sound. Where another soldier would only hear noise, Elias could see the position, the distance, the height, and even the emotional state of the sniper by the rhythm of his breathing or by the hesitation when pulling the bolt. He discovered that the German snipers had a pattern of movements. They adjusted their breathing in 3 cycles. They repositioned the trigger with a gentle touch, and only then would they cock the bolt. With a firm, short movement. For any soldier, this was inaudible amidst the chaos. For Elias, it was like hearing footsteps in the silence of the farm. At first, his teammates thought it was completely absurd. "Are you telling me you can hear a German breathing through a wall?" they mocked. He didn't answer, and there was no need to answer. Then came the first test. On a dawn patrol, the platoon was walking among ruins when Elias stopped suddenly. He said nothing. He simply put his ear close to a fallen door and raised his hand, gesturing for silence. A gesture so firm that it silenced even the grumbling of the veterans. Seconds later, Elijah whispered, "Right, up high. Broken windows, a sniper." The sergeant's eyes widened. "How do you know?" Elias merely touched the wood with the tips of his fingers. "He is moving." And it was. A shot rang out in the air immediately afterward, exactly where Elias was pointing. The platoon threw themselves to the ground, but no one was hit. When the German sniper tried to shoot again, Elias was already prepared. He tilted his head, took a deep breath, and fired before his opponent could even hold his aim. He was the first sniper Elias took down in the war, and from that moment on, the strange trick became a method. He honed his skills by testing with snow, mud, burnt metal, cracked doors, tree trunks, iron beams. Each surface transmitted a different type of vibration. Elias learned each one of them. He discovered that, in stone walls, sound traveled faster near the ground. The sound dissipated in soft snow, but vibrated brutally on firm ice. In the extreme cold, the expanded metal created subtle echoes that revealed height and distance. This learning experience transformed Elias into something no one could explain. A soldier capable of hunting snipers without seeing them. A man who saw the war through his ears. His trick seemed so improbable that some soldiers swore Elijah had some kind of divine gift. Others thought it was pure madness. But everyone agreed on one thing. It worked. And it worked so well that it began to frighten the enemy. The stories spread quickly. An American with one eye who killed invisible enemies. A soldier who could hear gunshots. A man who discovered something that no military manual taught. It was so absurd that it seemed impossible. But impossible was exactly the kind of thing Elijah was about to face, because his ingenious trick would soon attract the attention of the most dangerous enemy of all, Germany's best sniper. Elias Turner's rise didn't begin with applause, nor with speeches, nor with the kind of glory that history books love to recount. It began with silence, a tense, uncomfortable, almost religious silence. After he took down his first sniper, using only the sound conducted through the wood, the entire platoon stared at him as if they had witnessed something that didn't make sense. And, deep down, it didn't. It was as if Elias was playing a different game. A game that everyone thought they knew, but which, when he entered the field, completely changed the rules. The news spread even before sunrise the next day. Soldiers from other units came to verify if it was true. Some laughed, thinking it was an exaggeration. Others looked at Elias as if they wanted to see something mystical behind his scarred face, his white eye, his silent posture. And the strange thing is, the more they looked, the more uncomfortable they became. It wasn't out of fear, but out of feeling. Elias didn't look like a hero, nor did he have the presence of a commander. He was an ordinary man, almost too simple, almost too unremarkable. And perhaps that's what made it all the more unsettling. How could someone like that do that? The officers began to test him. They sent Elias on long patrols to areas with poor visibility, to terrain where ambushes were expected. He always returned, sometimes wounded, sometimes exhausted, but he returned, and little by little he left a trail of fallen enemies that seemed impossible for someone with half his vision. His fame preceded him. Soldiers murmured as he passed by. "It's him, the one in the ear, the white eye, the shadow hunter." Each nickname was stranger than the last, but they all conveyed the same feeling, fear. And it wasn't long before the enemy felt that fear as well. The first reports came from intercepted radios, snippets of quick, desperate conversations, talking about an American who found impossible positions, who killed hidden snipers, as if he were looking directly at them. Some Germans believed it was fabrication, psychological propaganda. Others believed something much worse, that the American was a kind of aberration of war, a creature that heard blood. Tensions began to rise on both sides. On the American side, Elias became the silent reference point. No one wanted to admit it, but everyone felt safer when he was around. On the German side, his name became a matter of superstition. Snipers began to change positions more quickly, to avoid areas where they knew the Americans had recently advanced, and to alter their routines. Elias, without realizing it, had become pure psychological terror. But with fame came the burden. For every life he saved, Elijah carried another that he took away. For every enemy slain, a new shadow gathered over his conscience. He didn't show it, but he felt it. He felt it when he put his head on the ground and heard the echoes off the walls. He felt it when the soldiers celebrated something he didn't see as a victory, but as a necessity. He felt it above all when the silence returned after the sound of gunfire. His rise wasn't driven by pride. It was driven by responsibility. Every time someone said, "God bless this guy," Elias felt a knot in his chest, because deep down he knew it wasn't a miracle. It was just the adaptation of a man marked by life, using what he had to survive. But no matter how heavy the burden, the war left no time for reflection. The battles intensified, the losses mounted, and each enemy advance seemed more aggressive than the last. Elias kept listening, and listening, and listening, until something new happened. The German snipers started acting differently. They weren't just trying to hide, they were looking for Elias. They exchanged signals, changed strategies, and set traps. It was clear. The German command had realized that there was a specific player throwing the game off balance. That's when whispers about a man began to surface. A German sniper who never missed. A legendary soldier even among the enemy army. A sniper with over 100 confirmed kills, known for being cold, calculating, and impossible to surprise. Nobody knew his real name. They simply called him the Shadow Hunter, and he had received a direct order: remove Elias Turner. From that day on, the tension in the air changed. It was no longer an ordinary war. It was persecution. Elias could feel this change in the sounds, in the vibrations, in the strange silences between one battle and another. It was as if something was watching, as if the wind itself had stopped to listen. Psychological terror has shifted sides. For the first time, Elias felt that he was truly being hunted, not by a troop, but by someone like him, someone who didn't make mistakes, someone patient, someone who lived in the shadows and breathed the battlefield. A duel was being prepared without a single word being spoken, an encounter that seemed inevitable from the first shot Elias fired in that war. And deep down, he knew this man was coming. This man was studying him. This man would be the greatest challenge of his life. From the moment Elias Turner's name came into the sights of the best German sniper, the battlefield changed its nature. It was no longer a war between armies, trenches, and strategies. It was a silent game of predator and prey, and the most frightening thing was that Elias didn't know which one he was. He only felt deep in his soul that he was being watched. It wasn't fear, it was instinct, that cold feeling that runs down your neck when something is about to happen. The first signs came subtly: a shot that passed too close but didn't match the enemy's position, a distant crack that didn't sound like an accident, the unnatural silence between two patrols. These small changes in the sounds of the field were beginning to bother him more than the cold itself. Elias had learned to trust the noises, but now what frightened him were the moments when there was no noise at all. The Shadow Hunter was nearby, not because Elijah saw him, but because he couldn't hear him, and that was terrifying. The following days were a psychological ordeal. The platoon advanced, but Elias felt that every meter gained brought the enemy closer. Sometimes in the early morning, he would wake with the sensation that something had moved beyond the darkness. He tried to listen, but nothing. No vibration. No breathing. This made him restless, almost irritated. How could someone be so quiet? The attacks have begun. The first one almost killed him. A perfect shot, hitting the stone just inches from his head. Elias instinctively threw himself to the ground, but he knew it wasn't luck. That shot had been a warning. The officers were alarmed. "Turner, they're after you," He simply nodded. He already knew. In the following hours, the German bombing raids seemed more coordinated, as if they were trying to push the platoon into a specific area. Elias perceived this from the echo of the artillery. The rhythm was tactical, almost surgical. It was a trap, and he was at the center of it. The second attack came during the night. While the group was resting, a series of shots pierced the walls of the mansion where they were. 2 soldiers fell. Elias felt the wood tremble under the impact. He rolled over, picked up his rifle, and followed the sound. But when he reached the window, the shooter had already disappeared. There were no footprints, no shadow, nothing. It was as if the enemy didn't exist. The price of greatness was beginning to take its toll. Each wounded soldier weighed on Elijah like a silent guilt. He didn't ask to be hunted. He didn't ask to be special. But now it was too late. Elias began to notice a change within himself. He wasn't just listening to the war, he was listening to his own fear. Not the fear of dying, but the fear of failing others. Fear that someone would die because of him. The third attack was the worst. During a patrol in dense snow, Elias bent down to examine the ground. When he placed his hand on the frozen surface, he felt strange vibrations, more than one source coming from different directions. It was an ambush. He yelled for the platoon to run, and in the next instant, a violent explosion threw him far away. The world turned, everything turned white, then black, and then silence. When he opened his eyes, he was lying in the makeshift infirmary. The only eye that could see was heavy and burning. The other, the blind one, throbbed as if pounding with guilt. A nurse said he was lucky to be alive. He didn't believe it. That explosion wasn't luck. It was precision. It was planned for him. The days dragged on while Elijah recovered. But rest did not bring peace. He dreamed of sounds, echoes coming from all directions, originless crackling, gunshots without a source, and always the same feeling: he is coming. When he finally returned to the field, the soldiers looked at him as if they were seeing someone returning from hell, and perhaps that was exactly what it was. Elias was thinner, paler, but his senses were sharper than ever. The explosion seemed to reconfigure something within him, a kind of hyper-consciousness. Now he could identify sounds in layers, as if the world had transformed into a huge chessboard of frequencies. That's when he understood. The shadow hunter wasn't just trying to kill him, I was testing it. With each attack, I studied their reactions, their response time, their method. It was a deadly dance between 2 men who had never met, but who knew each other as predators sharing the same territory. Elias knew he was running out of time. I knew the enemy was near. I knew the final confrontation could not be avoided. But what he didn't know, the fact is that this duel would push him to the brink of life and death, and that, in order to win, he would have to trust completely in the only sense that had never betrayed him: the ear. The day of the final confrontation didn't begin with trumpets nor with a grand announcement. It began with an eerie silence, too heavy even by the standards of war. The snow had stopped falling, the wind seemed to have lost its strength, and the air had that kind of stillness that precedes a storm no one sees coming. Elias felt it as soon as he woke up. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. The platoon had orders to advance through a small, ruined town with half-open stone houses, broken windows and a crooked bell tower piercing the grey sky. A perfect setting for snipers, a perfect setting for traps, a perfect setting for the man who had been hunting Elias for days. While the other soldiers checked ammunition and adjusted equipment, Elias simply breathed deeply, listening, not only to the obvious sounds, footsteps, metal, low voices, but to what came from beneath, the delayed echo of boots, the vibration of doors loosening on their hinges, the distant noise of something metallic being repositioned. Each sign said the same thing: he is here. The platoon advanced cautiously, making its way through narrow alleys and corridors. Elias walked a little behind, not out of cowardice, but because he needed space to listen. His single eye scanned the surroundings, but it wasn't his eye that guided his steps. It was his ear, always his ear. As they passed a partially destroyed mansion, Elias stopped. Something was wrong there. The sound of the wind entering through the cracks was different, broken as if something were blocking one of the entrances. He placed his hand on the wall, then on the doorframe of the fallen door on the ground. Nothing. Too much silence. Calculated silence. He looked at the sergeant and murmured, "Get everyone out of here." Now, the tone was clear. The sergeant obeyed. While the others moved away, Elias entered the building alone. The floor creaked beneath his boots, and each creak increased the danger. But he needed to get close to the right sound, the exact spot where the vibration would give away the enemy. The shadow hunter was there, somewhere above, probably in a high, invisible window, watching, waiting for the slightest exposure from Elias to fire the perfect shot. That's what the German did. He studied, waited, and executed. Elias knew that if he tried to hunt him down like a normal sniper, he would lose. He lacked depth of field. He had no visual advantage. But he had something. The other didn't. The ability to listen to the world like no one else. He climbed a flight of ruined stairs, feeling each step vibrate differently on the wood. When he reached the second floor, everything seemed thicker, as if the air had weight. There were holes in the walls, remnants of furniture, open windows. Any one of them could hide the enemy. That's when he did something that no one trained in military manuals would do. He lay down on the floor. Lying face down, he pressed the side of his face, the side with his blind eye against the cold boards. He closed his only good eye and silenced everything within himself. He stopped listening to his own thoughts, your own fear, your own heart. And then the world began to speak. First, he heard the wind passing through the trapdoor in the roof. Then the soft creaking of a rope somewhere higher up. Then a small cracking sound, as if a piece of wood were yielding an extra millimeter under weight. Above, to the right. After that, a pause. And then the sound that Elias knew better than anyone else. Theriful bolt being assembled with almost affectionate precision. But that sound didn't come through the air. It came by the wood. It descended through the ceiling, the beams, the nails, the entire structure of the house, until it touched Elias's face like a whisper. In that microsecond, he knew. The shadow hunter was in the attic, positioned between two beams, aiming his sights at a precise point, the window in front of Elias, waiting for him to make the mistake of looking out. But Elias wasn't going to look. He had already seen everything. Without being able to see anything, the German took a deep breath, adjusted the weight of the rifle. Elias listened to the breathing, slow, controlled. He heard the slight sliding of the fabric as the shooter repositioned his shoulder. He even heard the creaking of the leather glove when his finger touched the trigger. That was it. Either he shot first, or it would just be another nameless body in that city. Elias didn't think. His body moved before his mind. In a swift movement, he rolled to the side, rested the rifle against the ground, and, without standing up completely, aimed not at the window, but at the ceiling. He calculated the angle by the direction of the vibration, adjusted the sights a few centimeters to compensate for the likely distance, and fired. The shot went through the old wood, entered the attic, and cut through the charged air, right where the German thought he was invisible. There was a silence of half a second. Then a heavy sound, a body falling, and a rifle sliding across the floor. The shadow hunter was dead, for the first time. The soldiers heard the impact outside and stormed the building, imagining the worst. They found Elias still lying there, his face pressed against the ground, breathing heavily, as if he were hearing the end of the war. When they went up to the attic, they saw the body of the German sniper lying between the beams with a perfectly shaped hole in his chest. On his lips, a frozen half-smile, as if he had understood at the last second that he had finally found someone like him, and lost. This story spread like wildfire. On the American side, Elias became a legend. The one-eyed soldier who killed Germany's best sniper without even seeing him. The man who used his ear as a weapon and turned his greatest weakness into an absolute advantage. On the German side, the effect was devastating. If even the shadow hunter could be taken down, then no one was untouchable. The myth of invincibility has been shattered. In the following weeks, troop morale changed. Soldiers began repeating Elias's name as a symbol of something greater than technique, greater than strategy. He was living proof that even when everything points against you, there is still a loophole, a detail, a sound, a chance. And sometimes, that's all you need. But when the war ended, there was no parade for Elijah. There was no band. Nor were medals awarded in front of crowds. He received his awards in silence, thanked them with a restrained nod, and did what he always knew how to do. He went home. The farm was smaller, old, tired of waiting. But it was the only place in the world where he wasn't the sniper hunter, or the one-eyed soldier, or the legend whispered in the trenches. There, he was simply Elijah, the man who chopped wood, fixed fences, pressed his ear against the wood to tell if the rain was coming heavy or light. Sometimes at night, sitting on the porch, he would close his only good eye and let the wind carry sounds from afar. Laughter, footsteps, life goes on. And somewhere deep in the memory, the distant echo of that last shot that changed everything. There was neither excessive pride nor regret. There was only one silent certainty. An ordinary man with one eye missing had faced the impossible and defeated. And the world was never quite the same again after the day that a soldier blind in one eye killed the best German sniper. So, what did you learn from the story of this soldier who transformed his own weakness into the most unlikely weapon of war? If any part of this journey resonated with you, leave a comment below. I'd love to know what surprised you the most. And of course, if this content captivated you until the end, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and help this type of story reach more people who, like you, love strong, intense narratives full of overcoming adversity. Let's move on to the next story together.